US President Donald Trump says there is no time frame for ending the conflict in Iran. Let me remind you, it started with 4 to 6 weeks, and all these weeks later, there's no time frame. After this, he extended the ceasefire between the two nations indefinitely. And there is complete departure from Trump's initial claims that the war might last just 4 to 6 weeks. Trump told Fox News that there is no time pressure on the extended ceasefire or on the upcoming peace talks. So there is now no time frame on the war, on the peace talks, or on the negotiations, or on the ceasefire. The White House later repeated the claim, saying that Trump has not set a deadline for Iran to submit a peace proposal.
I know there's been some anonymous sourced reporting that there was maybe a 3 to 5 day deadline. That is not true. The president has not set a deadline himself. Ultimately, he will dictate the timetable.
Trump's latest remark puts another question mark over his strategy and objectives of the war. The US is currently maintaining a blockade on the blockaders against Iran. It has cut off Iranian ports, and in turn, Iran maintains its chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. A report says that Iran maintains more military capabilities than the White House or the Pentagon has publicly admitted so far. And there is a fragile, indecisive ceasefire in place. Despite Trump's claims, there is no clarity over any second round of talks. Earlier, just hours before the ceasefire was set to expire, Trump had opted to extend the truce and give Iran more time. White House claims that the gesture is an overture to encourage Tehran to adopt a more conciliatory approach to the negotiation.
This is a battle between the pragmatists and the hardliners in Iran right now, and the president wants a unified response. And so as we await that response, there's a ceasefire with the military and kinetic strikes, but Operation Economic Fury continues, and the effective and successful naval blockade continues as well.
The extension also shows an uncomfortable strategic reality. There is currently no clear path to force an outcome favorable to Washington. While war has not resumed, but the conflict is far from a resolution. Trump also faces conflicting pressures, rising domestic discontent and international unease over the disruption caused by the blockades. Then on the other hand, allies such as Israel and hardline sectors of the establishment demanding a more aggressive stance. Iran is betting on this dilemma. It hopes to outlast the US on the economic and political consequences of this blockade, and Washington on its part is confident that the pressure will eventually fracture Iran's position. Iran has maintained a definite stance, and they've maintained a collegiate approach. Even as Trump administration claimed a divide between hardliners and moderates, Tehran has stuck to a unified messaging so far. All right, we're now being joined live by Dr. Glenn Deason, Professor of International Relations at the University of Southeastern Norway. Dr. Glenn, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for making time. Let's start right off. Now there is a ceasefire, and it's an indefinite ceasefire. There's no time frame. With the US blockade of Hormuz, no timeline on the war, no timeline on the talks, no timeline on the ceasefire. Is US now stuck in the war with Iran with no clear strategy in place?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's easy to start a war, but it's much more difficult to get out of a war. I think this has been the experience of the NATO countries overall for the past 3 decades. This is why Trump ran his whole election platform on not doing these forever wars, but still he got pulled into this one. And the main problem with the Iran war is there's no pathway to an American victory, because you can't simply defeat an enemy by bombing them. And essentially all they can do now to try to defeat Iran would be to bring as much pain as possible, which means to undermine its economy, attack civilian infrastructure, and hope that Iran can't absorb the pain. But this isn't really a good pathway to victory. Meanwhile, while the US can't win the war, they also can't make peace, because if they go home and declare victory, Iran will then control the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, then they can set up a toll booth, which they already have, to collect reparations from the American attack, and they can also put pressure on countries in the Gulf states to expel US bases, to trade in other currencies than the US dollar, to dismantle the petrodollar. So they can't afford to leave either, which suggests that there's not much that the US can do. And I think that's why they went with this ceasefire. They really needed to put an end to this because the Americans are bleeding missiles and interceptor missiles. So they have to do something to stop this, but they can't actually make peace. This is why they accepted the ceasefire based on Iran's 10 points as a point of departure for discussion. And then as soon as they had the ceasefire, they began to walk back everything. And I think this is where the United States is really lost. There's no good pathway forward.
Glenn, let me just come in there, because there is a counter to that. While the US may be bleeding interceptors and missiles, Iran is actually bleeding. In terms of their power plants, there was a real threat when US has said that they will go after these power plants and those bridges. I still remember, and the audiences can go and check this out as well, that the Iranian president had mentioned that 14 million Iranians are willing to give up their lives. Human chains were formed in front of those power plants. And this is just shortly before Donald Trump eventually announced that first ceasefire for 2 weeks. But as far as the Iranian ports are concerned now, with the US blockade in place, that is also really hurting Iran. So Iran is hurt, but they've not capitulated. But as we talk about the Strait of Hormuz, at this point, with no exit strategy in place and more troops being deployed, has US gotten itself stuck in a bigger problem than existed before the 28th of February? Has this proven to be the most pointless war effort for the US?
Yeah, I think so. Well, first, let me address what you said about the pain felt by Iran. And I very much agree that Iran is feeling a lot of pain. Its cities are being bombed, its infrastructure is being destroyed, it's a hit on the economy, and also the military has taken quite a hit as well. So there's no question that Iran is suffering a lot from this war. But again, this is how Trump usually, define victory. Look how many people we killed and how much infrastructure we destroyed. But that doesn't amount to victory. The reason why, well, the assumption is that if you bring enough pain, Iran will then buckle and they will accept the defeat. The problem is that Iran considers this to be an existential threat. So they have to absorb this pain because there's no other alternatives. If they accept the US demands, that is essentially give up any of its conventional deterrence or give up its regional partnerships, its nuclear energy, or simply allow the US to bomb every now and then and decide when the bombing starts and when it ends, the Iranians sets themselves on a path to destruction, because the ultimate goal of the United States and Israel here is not to simply reduce the military capabilities or avoid Iran getting nuclear weapons. It is the destruction of Iran. They can call it regime change, but there's no replacement government in the rear. So this will mean to make Iran into a new Syria or a new Libya, a region of chaos which won't be able to challenge Israeli power. So for this reason, because it's existential, they don't really have much other option than actually absorbing this pain. And also it's seen as an opportunity, because if the US has to pull away and find some excuse to call it a victory, Iran might come out of this war extremely strengthened if it holds the Strait of Hormuz. So it's a very dangerous situation, exactly because we're in this kind of a all or nothing. Either Iran gets destroyed or it exits this as a very powerful regional power. So whenever states face all or nothing, they're willing to take great risks and absorb a lot of pain.